Block party time with Jmtowin from 1 week season. We got the top GPP plays for the week 3 DFS slate. We're going to go position by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. And then we'll wrap up, as always, by building a lineup on DraftKings with some of JM's favorite building blocks for the slate. I'm Pete Overzet. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, 35 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right, JM, we are back. As always, like to start with a little look in the rear view mirror. Last week, as I try to remember, it was Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison week. We had Devontae Adams week. How did your week 2 go?
Well, we talked about it before we came on air, but the obviously what we're trying to do in DFS is maximize our probabilities of finishing in first place every week. And last week it was like the Rams situation was literally, it's going to be one of the most plus EV setups we'll see all season, one of the top 2 or 3 most plus EV setups, which means like if we could play that slate 100 times, the amount of money we would make off of properly playing that setup would outpace basically everything else. In a small sample size of 1 week, it ended up being one of those weeks where that just failed miserably. Even if Kupp hadn't gotten hurt, he wasn't going to have like a big enough second half to make up for what we needed there. So it was kind of one of those strange weeks where I didn't have Kamara, but I was way overweight on Marvin Harrison Jr.
Wow.
Malik Neighbors was my highest owned wide receiver. Marvin Harrison Jr. was like my 4th or 5th highest owned. Had a bunch of other things that hit, had all the running backs who hit. And it was like, those were my secondary pieces and then my mix and match upside pieces around that Rams core. Obviously the Rams core failed last week, but everything for me is about assessing the process and whether or not I'm putting in samples that would make money over time. So obviously I knew that the Rams core would make money over time and kind of had a good feel for the rest of the NFL and how these games were likely to play out. So results, not great, process good, feeling excited about, feeling excited about this. I don't know, Pete, this is one of the strangest, like ugliest early season weeks you could possibly have. And on top of the injuries and the news we're waiting for on a Friday still, I mean, we're recording this Friday morning, a lot we still don't know. On top of all that, like the scoring in the NFL is down. Yeah. The nature of the scoring is down. And I won't dive into all of this here. There's actually some really interesting, critical stuff to pay attention to with all of this. So remember, like when the NFL shifted over to David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, right? And then other teams started copycatting that. And the way we were supposed to attack in DFS completely changed. And if you didn't adapt quickly, you fell behind the field. I think that something like that's happening right now. So I'm going to touch on that in the Angles podcast today, which is free. So if you're not an OWS subscriber, just search our YouTube channel or the 1 week season podcast feed, and you'll be able to find that later today. But I think there's some really interesting things about how teams are playing defenses, why they're playing defenses that way, why it's working, which I think is something we haven't really had a lot of people digging into in terms of like how these teams built themselves and how defenses adjusted and what teams can do. But what it's leading to is there are still going to be teams that pop off, but they're probably going to separate so much more than in the past because the average production is going to be down for a variety of reasons that I'm going to touch on in that podcast. But we just have to think about these things because the more we stay ahead of the curve and pay attention to what's happening in the NFL, the more we'll increase our opportunities to make money.
One other note, I was just thinking back to last week and thinking about how the lineup we put together is kind of like the chaos of the NFL in a nutshell, where we put in the Rams block. And everyone's like, oh, it's too chalky, it's too obvious. And then, Kupp gets hurt and like the chaos, it doesn't hit. And then the part that no one wanted to touch, Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors, it's too gross, I don't want to do it. That's the uber smash. That was the thing that was the lock in that lineup. And it's like, even when we're so overconfident or confident that one thing is the more likely thing to hit, the NFL can always throw us those curveballs.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking through Daniel Jones' game logs last night just to, because he hits these 30 pointers from time to time. And I was like, can we get any sort of bead on when it happened? I was looking through some stuff last night and I was realizing like throughout his career, all of his 30-point games that have been against like teams with losing records and mostly with bad defenses or like losing records late in the season, which is just kind of funny. Obviously Washington's going to fit that bill. So it was a good opportunity for him to potentially hit one of those. But yeah, all the little things add up.
Well, let's head into our slate overview here. We do have a ton of games still going on. It looks like we even got a decent balance as far as the early games and late games this week. We do have, a couple matchups that I know people are kind of circling. This Detroit and Arizona game is going to garner a decent amount of interest. What jumped out to you when you took a peek at this slate?
Well, yeah, we see these implied team totals. So this is on OWS, and these auto-populate. So, as the lines move, these will change. But implied team totals here, we see so many low total games, close spreads, and we kind of think about how these teams are trying to win games or what they're capable of, right? Like, are the Giants capable of putting up a ton of points against the Browns? And if they're not putting up a ton of points, how aggressive do the Browns want to be against this soft Giants defense with Deshaun Watson, the way he's looked? And, the Colts and Bears, the Colts, or have to kind of work around Anthony Richardson's strengths and weaknesses. The Colts can't stop the run right now, so the Bears will probably lean in that direction. So again, kind of lowers the scoring ceiling there. The Chargers and Steelers, we've seen how they've been playing. I actually think there's some kind of sneaky paths to that one turning into a higher scoring game, but the likeliest scenario is that it's a lower scoring game. And so kind of across the board, we have a lot of this where there's just not opportunity for scoring to elevate in like a 35-31 type of manner where it's like, that's the game you had to have. And then we have these games like the Cardinals and the Lions, where the Lions should be able to score points. In fact, the Lions, see if I can pull these numbers off the top of my head. The Lions are 10th in drive success rate, I think, right now, and maybe like 4th in yards per drive. Last year, they were like 2nd in drive success rate. But last year, they were one of the top teams in the NFL in red zone touchdown rate. This year, I think they're like 28th, right? So they're not having trouble moving the ball. They're just having trouble scoring when they get in the red zone. If that changes this week, they're putting up points. The Arizona offense is humming. The defense is still, their scheme is going to be sound. They're going to communicate well. They're going to play with intensity, but they don't have a ton of talent. So the Lions should be able to score points. Cardinals should be able to score points. It's one I really like. And then the Ravens and Cowboys is one of these games where it's like, there is a scenario in which this game underwhelms. There's also a scenario in which this is literally the game you had to have, right? Like,
yeah.
So I see it like this. If the Lions and Cardinals plays to its highest end outcome and the Cowboys and Ravens plays to its highest end outcome, that Cowboys and Ravens game blows away that Lions Cardinals game. But also the Lions and Cardinals probably play to the upside one way or another, and the Cowboys and Ravens game could play to the downside, right? So there's two different ways this could play out where, well, it's not just two different ways, but like the two clearest ways it could play out is Cowboys Ravens underwhelms and you had to have Lions Cardinals, or Cowboys Ravens hits and it's so far above anything else that you literally had to have it. In fact, last year, Dak and CeeDee Lamb at home, they cost 15.4K combined. Last year, they basically hit about 4x or more their salary 6 out of 8 games.
Wow.
Last year. And 2 of those games, it was 5x or more their combined salary. I mean, this team is just nuts. At home, they scored under 30 points, including playoffs. They scored under 30 points only one time at home last year. So, they're coming off a bad game at home, and it's going to be, the Ravens defense and the Cowboys didn't look good last week. I think that there's going to be some people who kind of move off of it because of that. But that's one of these games where it's like, we could look up and it's 41-35 when it's all said and done. So, and then there's a few other spots that are interesting, with some upside. But I think those are the 2 clearest games that we need to be paying attention to this week. Saints and Eagles being the one right behind those, and hopefully we get a little bit of chance to talk about this Saints offense. And then I think that Vikings and Texans game has an outside shot at being kind of obviously we know that everybody loves the Texans. We also know that I don't think people really understand that the Texans don't score 30-plus points all that often, and the Vikings don't allow 30-plus points all that often. So kind of like fringe build-around type spot, but another game that could end up being pretty important in tournaments.
What other kind of, bigger spot I wanted to ask you about is kind of like how you think about the Dolphins with the quarterback change. Obviously a big downgrade from Tua to Skylar Thompson, and yet you still have these incredible plays in Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill, just, some of the most talented players in the NFL. How do you think about their ceiling in this offense without Tua?
There's a lot to unpack here because it's also isolated to this specific week. So this specific week, how much time have you spent looking through value options this week?
A little bit. It's not great.
It's really, really thin, right? And so the typical thinking is like, okay, I can play this guy who's let's just take a price tag, 3,500, right? And if he gets me 12 points, that's not quite 4x his salary, but like it allows me to get up to this expensive piece. The problem is if the expensive piece, you know, we always say at OWS, like 30-point scores are rare. So anytime you get 30 points, it doesn't matter that much what you paid for it. It's just good to get those 30 pointers. But what if you pay 8,400 for Tyreek Hill's 28 to 30 point game, which is, you know, less than, it's like 3.5x his salary, 3.4x his salary, whatever that is. And then you're also only getting 3.4x, 3.5x from this cheap guy. You're pretty far behind the people who just built like price range rosters and hit a couple of 30 pointers in there, a couple of 5x's in there. So I want to be thinking about when there's such thin value, I want to be thinking about which high-end players can like post a had-to-have-it score, right? CeeDee Lamb had 3 or 4 40-plus point games last year, right? If he puts up 40-plus points, then I can take like a 10-point game from the cheap guy who allowed me to fit him. If Tyreek Hill scores 30 points, it doesn't really justify it. So I have a harder time, you know, Tyreek Hill, I think, had one game last year over 34, 35 points, and that was obviously with Tua. So then talking very specifically about this offense, you know, Skylar Thompson, 52% completion rate in his career.
Yeah.
Also, we want to recognize that we haven't seen him. You know, I was saying earlier this week, like he might have developed a lot behind the scenes and we just haven't seen it yet. And then I saw later in the week that, you know, Mike McDaniel's been talking about that, like Skylar Thompson's going to look like a totally different guy. You won't recognize him. And that might be the case, right? But I still have a hard time seeing Achane's in a different category with this discussion. We're just focusing on Tyreek Hill. Like the price hasn't adjusted enough for me to feel like there's a lot of positive expected value. I think he can get to a 30-point game. That won't surprise me, but the downside risk is greater than normal. And 30 points from Tyreek Hill won't help you as much this week as normal in like most scenarios that we could play this out. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that. Achane's still very much in the mix because you got to move the ball somehow. And but yeah, I have a hard time seeing Tyreek Hill paying off his price tag the way we would need him to pay it off, given the lack of value on the slate.
We'll talk a little bit more about the high-end wide receivers that we might want to target instead when we get to the wide receivers, but let's move here to quarterback. Also want to mention, as always, all the good stuff over at 1 Week Season. You can get 20% off with promo code Pete. We're going to give you a little sneak peek as the show progresses. Some of the stuff you can find there, including some of JM's favorite building blocks, and we will preview a little bit more of all of the great stuff over on OWS. Let's start here with quarterback. JM. I mean, I feel like there's so many different ways you can go this week. Even looking at early ownership projections, it feels pretty spread out. Like people aren't going to get, you know, necessarily funneled to the same 1 or 2 guys. What are you seeing at quarterback this week?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I don't know what anyone else is thinking at this point in the week.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that there was nothing that really stood out to me. I think that the guys who are probably going most overlooked when I looked at ownership projections yesterday, and that's early ownership projections, which is primarily projection driven, which will change throughout the week. But it seems like the guys who are going most overlooked are Dak Prescott at that 6,600 price tag. People are kind of, I don't know, maybe they feel he's too expensive or he doesn't have enough rushing upside. Again, he had five games last year of 28 plus DraftKings points, like 4 games of 32 or 35 plus DraftKings points, and 4 of those 5 came at home. And then again, you know, the just the combined scores between him and CeeDee Lamb this last year at home were just ridiculous. And so I think he's going kind of overlooked in this spot. And then I think Derek Carr right now, at least, is going overlooked. And I think what people are seeing is the lack of volume, right? They're like, oh, he's not throwing the ball much. He's thrown the ball 23 and 16 times, right? That's like 60 minutes of football 5 to 10 years ago is 39 pass attempts. But also they've completely controlled and dominated both of these games. I mean, if this game's close, you're looking at Derek Carr throwing the ball quite a bit more. And so at his price tag, I was going through his like game logs like a decade back last night, and just like there's so many 30-point Derek Carr games peppered throughout his career. It's not like he can't do that. He's capable of putting up 300 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. Just has to come together. So I think that he's another guy who I'll definitely be overweight the field on this week.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because these guys, specifically the pocket passing quarterbacks, they get kind of stigmatized. And Baker Mayfield was a great example week 1, where even like looking at his game logs last year, a lot of the production would go through the ground. He would have decent passing days, but like it never lined up that the touchdowns and his high passing volume days coincided for a monster fantasy day. And then he does it in week 1. It kind of feels like that with Derek Carr, where it's like, it's pretty clear to tell yourself the story of how a Derek Carr mega smash week hits. They get pushed. A few of those Alvin Kamara rushing touchdowns turn into Chris Olave touchdowns or whatever. And the floor looks incredible, right? Like even in these blowouts where they're barely even passing in the second half, he's cleared 20 points both weeks.
Yeah, I think that one of the edges that I've always felt we've had at OWS or with my old content at Roto Grinders is that most fantasy content is created through the lens of fantasy. So they're thinking about a player's production, which then often leads to looking at past game logs and just saying, oh, well, this hasn't happened yet. Like the number of times last year that I heard, well, Baker doesn't go for big games. And we really look at things through the lens of coaching, teams, game environments, matchups, game flow, and how a game might play out, which kind of allows you to, and then like you look at things through the lens of probability. So you say like, yes, like last year, week, 12, 13 was like, yeah, Baker hasn't topped 21 DraftKings points, but through the lens of probabilities, like through these first 11, 12 games, how many times was it within his clear range of outcomes to go for a 30-point score, right? He had so many times where it was like a little bit shy of the 300-yard bonus or just missed that extra touchdown pass or whatever it was. And it was very clear that that was still within his range of outcomes. And deep into the season, I think once or twice in the regular season and once in the playoffs, he hit these bigger games. He started the season with one of those. And so when we can look at things and say, yeah, sure, he hasn't done it yet, but that doesn't mean he's not capable of it. Because the reverse of that also trips people up in DFS. I mean, I was looking through ownership last night. I won't mention any players, but there were some players that I was looking through and just saying like, oh, this guy's 6% owned. This guy's 7% owned. That's me beating the rake. Like this guy in this game environment has no chance of helping somebody win a tournament this week. Like literally no chance. We play out the slate 100 times. He will not help anyone win a tournament this week. And he's going to be 7% owned, right? And players like that, like that's how you beat the rake. And then you're competing against the rest of the field from there. So just because a player had a big game or has had a big game in the past, we still have to think about like what can happen in this particular spot. So yeah, I mean, those are the two that I kind of see as overlooked. I think, in that same game with Dak, I think Lamar is really interesting. And that Lions-Cardinals game, I think both those quarterbacks are interesting. Obviously, Jalen Hurts in that game with Carr is interesting. And those are really the six main quarterbacks, like those three games, because if all the other games are game totals of 35 to 45, right? And then two of these games go for 55 plus, these are the games that you kind of had to have. And so, yeah, pretty much all my quarterbacks are going to be pulled from these. I'll probably have some Sam Darnold in large field play as well. But these three games are kind of my main focus for quarterbacks.
Just to drill down on that Arizona-Detroit game a little bit, I don't think people need to be sold on Kyler Murray. Like nearly had a perfect game last week. Now at home here again, only 6,900. I think Jared Goff's maybe a little bit more of an interesting conversation topic. He's 6,500. I assume most people who want access to this game will say, "Hey, I'll just spend the extra 400 and get up to Kyler." What do you think about Jared Goff's price here and kind of viability as a tournament option?
Yeah, the price is higher than you'd like, but it's also kind of, Levitan used to always say, pay up to be contrarian. It's one of those where just spending the few, like if he was 5,900, right? He'd be quite a bit more popular. So you spend the extra 600 for the lower ownership. And to me, a lot of times in these games where you need the back and forth, you're kind of saying, well, I do this all the time where it's like the 6,200 running quarterback versus the 7K pocket passer. And it's like, I'm going to have 0% of the 7K pocket passer because like if this game stays close back and forth, the 6,200 running quarterback is going to outscore this guy almost all the time at a lower price tag. But in this situation, you actually have something where, look, the Cardinals have looked really good through 2 weeks, right? They got out to that lead against the Bills and then just absolutely couldn't stop them down the stretch, and then really hammered the Rams last week. A Rams team that was kind of a sexy pick this year for playoffs and even a deep playoff run. But like this is still the Lions, right? This is still a team that everybody had, they should have been in the Super Bowl last year. They blew that lead. They were in the NFC Championship game. A lot of people have them going back to the Super Bowl. It wouldn't be a shock if the Lions controlled this game and end up winning 30-17, right? So in that scenario, Goff could have 3 or 4 touchdown passes and Kyler doesn't hit. So I don't necessarily look at this as a spot where it's like, oh, well, why not just spend a little bit extra for the running quarterback? Because the pocket passer is on the better team. And so there is a scenario where the running quarterback just doesn't get his and Jared Goff gets his. So I'll have a pretty even split of these two guys, which will be nice, right? Because the field will overweight Kyler in this situation.
Last week we had Daniel Dimes that you were on and, you know, specifically with Malik Neighbors. Are there any value options, or it does seem like you kind of want to be more heavily concentrated on the games you think you might need, as opposed to, say, are you interested in a Geno Smith at 5,600, a Deshaun Watson at 5,500, any of these other value plays, maybe a Justin Fields at 5,400?
Yeah, so Geno, I was kind of back and forth on putting him on my list just because he's coming in as the highest projected owned quarterback. And so I was like, oh, do I want to account for that a little bit? I'm always thinking game environment. I'm always thinking first place, right? So will Geno put up like 18 to 22 points? He's got a pretty good shot at that. And so I won't argue against playing Geno. My thing is, can he put up 30 points this week? Like, I have a hard time seeing the Dolphins playing this game in such a way that Geno is forced to put up 30 points. And so that kind of pulls me off. And same thing with Purdy. Like, Purdy so consistently last year put up 20 to 24 DraftKings points. And I even made a note where it was like, Purdy's going to put up 20 to 24 points this week. Like, he's going to have like 25 pass attempts and put up 20 to 24 points. And then it was like, well, what does 20 to 24 points get you? You know, like, you're probably not winning a tournament off that. So I'll probably have some Purdy in large field play. I'll probably have, maybe I might have some Geno in large field play. I'll probably have some Deshaun Watson in large field play. I like that Chargers and Steelers game as a game that could develop differently than everyone's expecting, right? Both defenses know that the opponent is going to start things out on the ground. Both teams play from the trenches, right? So if the defense is able to kind of keep those run games in check, we could see one of these teams say, all right, let's start passing the ball a little bit more. Let's start taking some shots. For all the hate that Arthur Smith gets, he is obsessed with hunting chunk plays, right? Obviously, there's a lot of runs mixed in, but there is opportunity for that game to develop. So large field play, have a little bit of Justin Fields. Like I said, Sam Darnold. But, you know, basically it's like a whole list of guys that I'm not going out of my way to argue against. But if we're talking like, what am I putting on my tighter builds, my single entry, my 3 max, my smaller field contests, it's going to be, I'm going to primarily focus on these other games because I see a scenario in which Dak could put up 35, 38 points. I see a scenario in which Jared Goff could put up 30, 32. I see a scenario in which Lamar Jackson could put up 35 to 40. You know, these guys in these potential back and forth high scoring game environments could blow away these other quarterbacks. And it's like, yeah, you got 20 points from Geno or Purdy or whatever, but like, that's great at their price tag, but it's not tournament winning. And I think there are going to be some tournament winning quarterbacks this week.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dynamic to think through because essentially what we had happen last week was none of the quarterbacks really separated from the position. And so then you can kind of get away with an 18, 20 points from these guys. But if you have the guy who goes for 35 plus, then it's like, how are you winning a tournament without them?
And there are weeks where you kind of look at the slate and you're like, I don't think that this happens a lot with like Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar are all 8K and above, and they're all on the main slate. But it's like, I don't see any of them putting up 35 to 40 points, right? And then you're like, I can get away with, you know, they hit 3.5x their salary. I can get 4x salary from a cheap guy, and that actually helps me more. And so there are weeks where you just don't really see the blow you away score coming from quarterback. This week, it's very much within the range of outcomes that we get, like a had to have it score at quarterback. And so I always want to think about what will a first place roster look like? What will other people be hunting down? Like, oh, I wish I had that. And then make sure that I'm the person who is giving myself a chance to have that. So this week, I just see several quarterbacks who have that within their range of outcomes. And if none of them hit it, like several of them are still going to get those 20 to 22 to 25 points, right? So then I spend a little bit more than the Genos and the Purdys to get the same score, but I'm also giving myself a shot at, if things play out in that to the upside, I'll have one of these guys that people are kind of chasing and wishing that they had.
I guess the last name we should probably hit on would be Anthony Richardson. 6,700 back home here in the Dome, had 27 points at home in week 1. Getting Josh Downs back this week, it sounds like, which should be a little boost there. Thoughts on Anthony Richardson?
You know, that game last week was, I think it was his second or third away game since high school, just because of like the nature of how little he played in college and like how his games shaped up in college, and then being hurt last year. Yeah, I I'm probably not going to have Anthony Richardson, but like he's in
Yeah.
that bucket of guys that if you're like, oh no, I want to have, if he's in the bucket where you're like, oh, I want to have him as my quarterback in single entry.
Yeah.
I would ask like, what is the contest size and why do you need to take on that risk when against this Bears defense, like his chances of hitting are just really low, regardless of his skill set. But if you're in like a single entry, 12,000 entry contest, 20,000 entry contest, like, yeah, by all means, take a home run swing on that. You got to take some home run swings. If you're in large field play, anybody with this skill set and this level of talent is on the table, right? And so, yeah, he's not a guy I would argue against, but I'm not going to go there because against this Bears, to me, I'm like, what's his upside against the Bears defense? Like his best score is probably about 30 points, but like you're taking on a lot of risk to get there. And that's really just kind of what you need at his price tag. And so, you know, I mean, what's Jared Goff's high end ceiling? 30 points also, but it's like his chance of getting there are higher than Anthony Richardson's. And furthermore, you know, we talk about the second bet down the line. You can loop that into game stacks where you're benefiting even more heavily from it. Whereas with Anthony Richardson, it's all kind of, a lot of times like you're getting one piece right, and you're taking on more risk to get that one piece right. And you know, the ceiling's kind of the same as some other guys. So yeah, not a guy like I have strong arguments against in a vacuum, but just in terms of like what would make us the most money on this slate, he doesn't go into the bucket for me.
Yeah, and I will say again, I always like to think through kind of where if you do want exposure to a player and doing it on the right scoring settings, the right platform. I think a play like Anthony Richardson lends itself to the underdog stuff a lot more, where there's only 6 spots in the lineup. The correlation isn't as big of a deal. You're touchdown hunting in big ways there. So, and speaking of underdog, I always do Often on the Clock with the Badge Bros right after the show that kicks off at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. We simulcast that here as well as on the Badge Bros channel. We'll be talking through the DFS slate through the underdog lens on that show. So if you guys are looking for that, in addition to the DraftKings plays, make sure you guys stick around for Off and On the Clock.
Jam, let's fan of the Badge Bros.
Oh yeah, they're the best. They're crushing here to start the season as well. So we'll see what we can cook up for week 3. As we head over to running back, JM, a little bit more value plays, I think a little bit more obvious plays where people might gravitate. We, of course, have Jordan Mason. Once again, without Christian McCaffrey, that salary still seems too cheap. We have Alvin Kamara, who's leading all running backs and scoring. We got Charbonnet again this week with Kenneth Walker out. And then the other kind of new value popping up would be Cam Akers with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce looking like they won't play. What are your overall thoughts on the running back position this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think Achane, Charbonnet, Mason, and Kamara are in their own tier, and it's a tier way above the other running backs. If Cam Akers comes in with, I don't know, 20% ownership because he's got these injuries in front of him, I'm going to be celebrating. You know, like I'm going to have some Cam Akers, but it's going to be way less than that. I mean, Cam Akers last week, he played 13 snaps and Dare Ogunbowale played 20 snaps. Cam Akers had a critical fumble in that game as well. He had 8 touches. Ogunbowale had 4 touches, but it's like, I don't think Cam Akers is that guy that everybody wants him to be, right? And I think that he's going to be splitting snaps with Ogunbowale. He's not going to step in for a Charbonnet role. Charbonnet played 67 out of 70 snaps last week, right? Yeah. That's where it's like, oh, the value is just so great that you can't pass up. Like Charbonnet's not a great north-south runner, which you really need to be in the NFL in order to succeed. It's why he doesn't get enough snaps, as many snaps as people last year thought that he would. But he's involved in the passing attack. He's the only running back that they're going to give the ball to in the run game. Like there's really no way for him to just completely fail, you know? And so a guy who's getting that many touches, or Jordan Mason, who saw, 21 out of 22 running back touches last week, not going to get a lot of targets, but probably gets 25 plus carries in this game script if the 49ers are able to control this game. So situations like that, it's harder for me to, these guys are so cheap. It's harder for me to save the salary to go down to Cam Akers. I will have some Akers, but to me, he's like in a very different tier than these other guys. And like, don't worry about chalk on these guys is my thought. Like Achane, Charbonnet, Mason, Kamara, they're just clearly better options than most of what's out there. And there's some other guys I'll be mixing in like for various reasons, but these guys are all very sharp plays.
Any thoughts on it now seems like George Kittle's not going to play. This Niners offense is down to essentially Jordan Mason and Brandon Ayuk as, the actual ballers in the offense. Are there any concerns just that the offense has lost too many pieces to, put up a really big score? Is it just like the system is so good, Purdy's competent, and the touches are going to be there for Jordan Mason that I'm basically not worried about any systemic risk?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to something with Jay Gruden last night, and he was talking about how he does not understand Kyle Shanahan's like third and long drop back passing design. He's like, he's like one of the best coaches we've ever seen on first and second down. But like when he's behind the chains on third down, like it just doesn't make sense. Like in terms of the concepts he's running, what he's doing, like, and they've never been good at that. They've never been good at comebacks. Remember how like when they were, he was like 0 for 38 and like down 7 points in the fourth quarter. And that's a function of like the drop back passing game for Kyle Shanahan's offenses have never been their absolute strength, but they're really good at staying ahead of the chains just through design. And against this Rams defense that like outside of Jared Verse has looked awful. I mean, Tre'Davious White looks like they went to Walmart and like asked a cashier to come in and play. I mean, this defense has been pretty bad early in the season. And I just think that the 49ers will be able to, they've still got their offensive line. They've got Jordan Mason. They'll be able to stay ahead of the sticks. And if they're able to stay ahead of the sticks, just that scheme does so much to strain the defense. The Kittle one, it's funny. I actually, this week, it's early in the season, I was like, I'll get a head start on my late week work. I started writing some of my NFL Edge DFS interpretations on Tuesday on my flight to Oakland. And then like by Wednesday, there's so much injury news coming out. And I'm like, come on, guys, it's week 3. What are we doing, right? And then had my player pool already built out yesterday, and then the Kittle news came out. So yeah, I'm waiting to see official, Friday practice reports on Kittle to really get a sense there. But I think to me, Mason is, it doesn't bother me, right? Like we had so many games last year where Purdy threw the ball. It was, 11 out of 16 games. He had 28 or fewer pass attempts last year.
Yeah.
I mean, so if a typical NFL offense runs 60 to 65 plays. So if you're only throwing the ball 25 to 28 times and you're only giving the ball to one running back, right? Like Mason just has such a clear pathway to 25 plus touches here. The Rams are also super banged up. So I don't expect the Rams to put the 49ers in negative game script. And so no, I still feel confident in that one, whether Kittle plays or not.
Yeah. And the utilization has just been awesome for Mason. He's been 81% of the snaps. We saw his rush attempts even go up in week 2 to 91% and running a little bit of the routes too. So it's not like he's just completely coming off the field in passing situations. So hard to not like the Jordan Mason play. Let's talk about that Arizona-Detroit game. We know that's an environment we like. You were on James Conner last week. If we look here, Gibbs is 6,800, Conner 6,600, Montgomery 6,100. Any interest in these backs?
There might be. Maybe just stick around for the building blocks.
This is why I'm supposed to ask you ahead of time so I can like.
I don't think you asked me last week, but I don't think you did last year. It's kind of fun, You have to have a little mystery and surprise. There's something in here that I like. I mean, again. Okay. All of this is in a different tier than Achane, Charbonnet, Mason, and Kamara. And it's not that those 4 guys are going to hit for the highest scores. But when we think about running back, we talked about this. I think we talked about this last week on this show. I definitely talked about it a lot last week, but last couple of weeks, like running back, we should be thinking about it less. It's rarely going to be the place that wins us the tournament, right? Now, we did have Kamara last week, put up the had to have it score. But typically, like as long as the guys are getting a lot of volume, then the consistent scoring is what we want. It's like the Baker Mayfield thing we were saying, like, yeah, he hadn't gone for 25 plus points, but he was consistently knocking on that door. So any of these guys who are consistently getting the touches that allow them to go up to 30 points on a given week are also going to consistently get like 16 to 20 points when they fail. And then you don't have like running backs, probably not where you're going to win a tournament, but it can be where you lose a tournament. And so, what I like to look for is the guys who have heavy volume, are going to hit those 16 plus points a lot of the time and have pathways to 30 plus points. And these guys fall into that bucket. So there could be other running backs who outscore them, but you're taking on more risk to get there. And so these will be my central pieces. I think maybe the most interesting 2 outside of this bucket are Tony Pollard, just because, he's getting 17 to 22. I think he has 19 and 22 touches the first 2 games. And, he's playing well ahead of Tajay Spears. And if Malik Willis is starting for Green Bay, another one of these injury situations we're waiting on, Tennessee's going to say, look, Will Levis, you've seen the Will Levis stuff, right? Like Brian Callahan asking him on sideline, what the F are you doing? And then talking about his dumb decision-making in his press conference after the game. And like, they need to go back to square one with Will Levis, right? And if they're able to control this game against Malik Willis and the Packers, they're probably not going to be like, hey, Levis, go like bombs away and try to win us the game. They're going to say like, hey, let's just stay in control and run the ball. So I think another 20 carries or 20 touches for Pollard is a pretty foregone conclusion. And then DeAndre Swift, who really he's getting all the work for the Bears backfield. And the Colts, it's funny. I've been watching a lot of this Belichick content, right? He's putting out there, and he's very cognizant of not openly criticizing other coaches. And then anytime he's asked about the Colts defense, he's like, I mean, I really don't know what they're thinking, like he said that multiple times. Cause like Gus Bradley is still in this like Seattle 3 headspace where it's like, well, just do what we do and you got to come beat us. It's like, well, you don't have Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Bobby Wagner and Earl Thomas. So I mean, they've been incapable of stopping the run. The Bears have been incapable of running the ball, right? So that's where the issue comes up with Swift. But I think those two guys are interesting. And like I said, there's guys who could outscore those top 4. But in terms of how I like to handle the running back position, those guys are just in a different tier.
Do you think, how do you recommend for being, I know every lineup is unique. I guess maybe thinking through like your own player pool, it sounds like you would have no problem just starting with 2 of 4 of those guys, maybe even playing 3 of 4 of them. Or would there be like, no, I'd like to sprinkle in a Swift, a Pollard, one of these guys who aren't going to be as popular to kind of balance out a duo or trio of players that I know are going to be very represented in the field's lineups?
Yeah. So I actually went kind of deep into this component of roster construction in our Winner Circle podcast this week. So if you're an Inner Circle member and you haven't listened to that, you can find that in the Inner Circle podcast feed. It's paywalled. You get the podcast on your Apple podcast player or wherever you listen to your podcast. But so Pete, in the NFL drop down and you go to the podcast page. And so if you are an Inner Circle member, you'll have a link on this page to that podcast feed. That's the only way you can find it. So there you go. Pete has the link, but other people will not. So the basically the thought with roster construction is like the smaller the contest field, the more high confidence plays I want. But typically you're going to have like, so if it's like 300 entries, I'm willing to have as many as like 8 high confidence plays. Let's take defense out, right? Let's just say like there's 8 positions. I'm willing to have 8 high confidence plays. So high confidence plays doesn't mean they're going to hit, but it just means like these running backs we're talking about, their chances of failing are that much lower and they have tournament winning ceiling. So that's a high confidence play. As we get into, a couple thousand entries, that's where I start being like, okay, now I want to make sure, like go out of my way to make sure that I have 2 lower confidence plays that have tournament winning ceiling. They have a lower floor. They can crack my roster, but they also have tournament winning ceiling. Ideally at low ownership, not the guys that like are low confidence plays, but the field is heavy on that week. But the guys who's like, oh, nobody's on them. They can.
That's Cam Akers for you this week, right?
What's that?
That's a Cam Akers for you this week would be an example of the,
Precisely. And then as we get into larger and larger fields, like the number of high confidence plays that you want on your roster might go down, right? Or at least that you're willing to eat. So if I have like a roster with only 3 high confidence plays and 5 of like my low floor, high upside plays, then I'm like, I see that roster. I'm not going to put it into a single entry 3 max smaller field contest, but it's a great roster still for large field play. If I have a roster that's like 7 or 8 high confidence plays, then maybe all of them have some level of ownership. Obviously, my roster is going to be built with a better story than most of my competition, but it's like you still want to have some really low owned guys the larger the tournament fields get. So basically all that to say, like in smaller field, well, in any contest, I'd be willing to have 2 or 3 of these running backs. As the contest sizes expand, I'm willing to pull in other running backs. And that doesn't have to be like, I could have a 500 entry contest, right? Where I have 2 lower confidence, high ceiling plays. And one of those might be one of these running backs. 2 of them might be, might be a Pollard Swift roster in a 500 entry contest, but then my other 6 spots are going to be like pretty high confidence plays. And so it all just kind of depends on like what contest size you're in and what your high confidence pool is and how these other guys fit into that.
2 other guys I want to ask you about. Saquon Barkley and Kyren Williams, both a little bit pricey, but we've seen some encouraging things from them, at least in one of their 2 games this year. Let's start with Kyren. How are you thinking about him? Is this like maybe the inverse of the Niners situation where they've just lost too many, players to still be an interesting functional offense?
I've been back and forth on it, and where I think I've finally settled is, again, like what are his chances of a 40-point score, and I just think pretty low. And I think you're taking on a lot of risk, hoping you get the 25 to 28 pointer from him. I won't go out of my way to argue against Kyren Williams ever, but his role isn't as big as it was last year. And the offensive line is in shambles, and they don't have any weapons in the passing attack. So, I mean, it's kind of rough sledding in that situation.
Yeah.
Saquon is another one of these guys that falls into this bucket of like the tier 2 guys, who could outperform my tier 1 guys. And so I'll have it mixed in, and I'll have a lot of stuff from that game. And so as a result of that, I'll have plenty of him.
Awesome. Let's move on to wide receiver plays here. Always a ton to talk through at this position. We can maybe start at the top. We mentioned maybe not having quite as much interest in Tyreek Hill, basically because of the opportunity cost potentially on the slate of where your high-end money is going to. If you're not going to Tyreek, you might be looking at CeeDee Lamb, at Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams. What stands out to you at the top of the wide receiver position this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lamb is the cream of the crop there in terms of who has the highest chance of preventing other people from winning the tournament, right? Of like, I didn't have CeeDee Lamb, I can't win this week. He's the guy among these that I think can do that. Is there a chance that like St. Brown, well, I guess St. Brown could against Arizona, right? But like his chance of putting up a 40-pointer are that much lower. So maybe CeeDee Lamb puts up 15 and Jefferson and St. Brown put up 32, 33, right? And that ends up being the top wide receiver score. But in terms of like somebody putting up 40 plus, I think it's CeeDee Lamb is far and away like the top option among these, just from a game environment perspective and a role perspective. And then St. Brown and Jefferson, I really like both of them as well. I'll have plenty of both of them as well.
Yeah. One thing I kind of wanted to maybe drill down a little bit in, you were talking about like the game environment stuff and, thinking through if you take, let's say any of these high-end guys, the CeeDee Lamb, the Amon-Ra, the Jefferson, do you find yourself more willing to play them as like a one-off of like, or even like a skinny stack where it's like the alpha game goes through this guy, kind of similar to what we saw with Jefferson last week? Or are you inclined to say, hey, scoring is down. There's only going to be 1 or 2 probably really good game environments. Let me tack on a Jake Ferguson. Let me build out a big bet around their entire offense. Do you have a lean as it maybe pertains to these high-end wide receivers?
I'll play it both ways. Not in the. I mean, I guess you could throw in Jalen Naylor on a Justin Jefferson because he's cheap enough. But
yeah.
And a Tolbert, a Ferguson, a Brandon Cooks, whoever with the CeeDee Lamb. I'll play it both ways. I'm gonna primarily this week prefer to kind of build a little more skinny because we know that the offense is flowing through them. The Lions side, I mean, Jameson Williams, 9 and 11 targets through the first 2 games, and he's so mispriced, and he's so like his ownership projections are not coming in at like 15 to 20%. They're coming in like I think it's like 7% range.
Yeah,
like
that's crazy.
I mean, this is a ridiculous situation here, and I think he's also one of the sharpest plays on the slate. So, but yeah, he's a guy that we could see priced at 6,800 in a month, and that wouldn't surprise me. This could you
said that last week, and it's like he keeps just delivering. Like, what is the price tag?
Yeah, this is kind of the game that could catapult him to that as well in this matchup against Arizona. So, but yeah, the other ones I like. CeeDee Lamb is so clearly the top option. Justin Jefferson is so clearly the top option in those offenses that that's going to be my primary focus there. But I will have some mix and match of, some big stacks, some big game stacks, some skinny stacks, lots of different ways to play those.
What is the thought on Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, coming off of a monster game? Everyone left him for dead after week 1, said he was too slow, was never going to do anything, then goes absolutely berserk. Now gets another great game environment. Is it point chasing this week to go to Marvin Harrison, or did you like what you saw from him?
Oh, no, it's not point chasing at all. I mean, like he's priced where he should be priced, and he's in a good game environment. He doesn't stand out to me this week the way he did last week, because last week just like the matchup was so soft and the setup was so good because I thought the Rams were going to cook the the Cardinals, I thought they were going to have to be passing a lot. It ended up working in reverse. But, the who is it? Steve Palazzazzo, is that how you pronounce his name? And Sam Monson.
Yeah, from PFF.
PFF, and now they're with the 33rd team. And they had an instant reaction video last night after the Patriots-Jets game. And they were saying, if this had happened, like if we had seen this game coming off of the offseason, we would all be like, oh yeah, this is what we expected, right? But the Patriots looked better those first couple games, and the Jets kind of took a little bit of time getting their feet under them. Aaron Rodgers didn't look that mobile yet. I think it's important to remember, right? Like the 1-2 game samples can so heavily sway the way we're looking at these teams that it's important to also zoom out and be like, okay, also what were we thinking throughout the offseason? And there's no reason to adjust our thoughts. I mean, Marvin Harrison had 2 end zone like misconnections with Kyler, where he was open on like little back shoulder throws and Kyler threw it to the wrong spot. Like not he didn't misfire. It was just like miscommunication of where I want you or where I need the ball or whatever it was. And they're going to get those ironed out, right? Like he could have had 4 touchdowns last week because he had these 2 extra end zone targets that just didn't hit. So no, I mean, I like him this week. I think he's like not a priority for me, but that game is a priority for me. So he'll be mixed into a lot of my rosters.
No Deebo Samuel and potentially no George Kittle leaves Brandon Ayuk atop the target totem pole in San Francisco. No AJ Brown leaves Devontae Smith. Those 2 look like some of the better values, at least from kind of like a points per dollar standpoint. Any love for those guys? Yeah,
I'm actually kind of surprised we're not seeing any love for Goddard. Goddard 4,600 and no AJ Brown, and one game where he didn't hit in that scenario, and people are like, oh, it's just Devontae Smith, and it's like going to be the highest owned wide receiver. Devontae Smith is incredibly talented. I mean, once you're getting up to 6,900 price tag, like that's kind of like he's got to put up 30 points. Is he going to put up 30 points like as often as people think? What is he coming in at like 30% ownership right now? Maybe it's lower than that.
I'm seeing like 25. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, he's not hitting 30 points 25% of the time. I'll tell you that. But no, I think he's a perfectly fine play, and I'll have a lot of. I will be playing him on rosters that build around that game. And probably not playing him outside of that. So like that's different from CeeDee Lamb, where I'll have some one-off CeeDee Lamb and have CeeDee Lamb in game stacks. Same thing with St. Brown or with Jameson Williams in particular. But no, I like the Devontae Smith play, and I'll have my fair share of Devontae Smith, but it'll be wrapped into betting on this game environment as a whole taking off. Brandon Ayuk, I don't know, man. I'm kind of up and down on Brandon Ayuk. Remember when everyone thought Juju Smith-Schuster was like great wide receiver?
I know where this anecdote is going.
Antonio Brown was like, yeah, well, wait to see what happens when I'm not drawing all the attention, I don't think Ayuk's in the Juju Smith-Schuster range, right? Like Ayuk is definitely a really, really good wide receiver, but there's a lot of questions that was asked all offseason, like, is Brandon Ayuk capable of producing at the level of efficiency that he did last year if he's the main guy, the guy drawing all the attention? So, I like Ayuk. I'll have Ayuk. I don't see him as an ultra smash slam dunk can't miss play, which I think is how a lot of people are going to see him. But then I also think if you throw the ball 25 times and there's no Kittle, like what's Jawan Jennings going to get? 5 targets, 6 targets? Like what's Jordan Mason going to get? 2 targets? There's going to be targets for Ayuk. So I could see him getting 10, 11 targets. I don't think he's going to have like 15 targets. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could see him getting 10, 11 targets. And at his price tag and his talent, he's definitely in play against that cooked secondary.
Let me throw a few other names kind of in the mid tier who look decent to me and get your thoughts on them. Malik Neighbors, Chris Godwin, Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, kind of adjacent to the Brandon Ayuk and Devontae Smith plays.
Yeah, Neighbors to me, I'll play Neighbors. I was really surprised to see his ownership projections. I kind of thought like he would be low owned this week because of the matchup against the Browns, but everybody sees 18 targets and they're like, well, they're going to do that again.
62% target share or whatever.
Yeah. I will play Neighbors, but only with Browns bringbacks. Because the thought is like the Giants don't have a secondary that can stop the Browns. The Browns can only stop themselves. So that can happen from game flow or them just being bad again. But we're still like Amari still has 3 games in his last 9 with Deshaun Watson of 28 plus DraftKings points, right? He has 8 and 9 targets through the first 2 games. If Neighbors is hitting, then that probably means the Giants are keeping this game competitive. the Browns are passing the ball 30, 32 times, and Amari is the likeliest one to hit in response, or possibly Duty. Elijah Moore's got this kind of short area role, but a lot of targets. He's cheap. But yeah, like my neighbors will all be paired with Amari, which isn't to say that that's guaranteed to be the way it plays out. It's like that's how we would make the most money if we played out the slate 100 times. And then the fact that other people won't play neighbors that way makes it that much more plus EV. So like most of the time when neighbors hits, it will lead to a Browns wide receiver hitting, and most people won't play it that way. So just like I'll go overweight on that, and all of my neighbors will have a Browns return piece. DK Metcalf kind of, again, everything requires context, like his stat line is kind of what's really drawing the attention. Well, I mean, he had a 56-yard touchdown last week where there's nobody on him, not because he ran some amazing route, right? Like Kyle Duggar and Christian Gonzalez had miscommunication at the line of scrimmage on like who had that route. And they were both standing flat-footed as DK Metcalf just ran by them wide open, right? So you take away that 56-yard touchdown, and it's still 13 targets, and it's still like a nice game. But like the 1.9 DraftKings points right there, that takes away 6, 9, 16. It takes away 16 points, right? He's got 15 DraftKings points, somewhere in that range. So yeah, I mean, game environment and all that. Like I'm not going to be on DK Metcalf. There's a lot of these that we're going to say where it's like, I'm not arguing against these guys, right? There's just a lot of guys who are in kind of a similar bucket, and I'll pick some pieces from there. And then, but I'm trying to think through like, can Nico Collins hit for a tournament winning score? Yes. Like Justin Jefferson can bang in some big plays, and then the Texans are firing back, and they figure out this Brian Flores defense, and Nico Collins hits from big plays. Like I'm less scared about missing out on, I guess I gauge it by like, who am I scared of them killing me if I don't have them? If I don't have any Nico, I'm scared going into Sunday that like, hey, he might end up burying me. And, since I started playing MME in 2022, I've had, I think, 3 different times where like a player buried me and I had 0% exposure. Kamara last week was one of them. Mixon in his like 56-point week was one of them. And I had 5,500 Justin Fields at low ownership going for 50 points that week as well. And like couldn't win tournaments because I didn't have the Mixon with him. And then there was one guy last year. So like, generally speaking, I'm pretty good at being able to say like, okay, who are the guys I like the most? Then also who are the guys who could kill me, and make sure I have exposure to them. And so these other guys just aren't on my list, which again, there's going to be times where somebody who's not on my list does kill me, but like their chances are just that much lower. So I'm not on them.
What about you? We mentioned like finding value on this slate, specifically at wide receiver, seems really tough. I mean, I'll throw out a couple names at you. You mentioned Elijah Moore already, 3,600. Jawan Jennings with some opportunity popping up there at 4,100. I mean, I'm trying to find something here. Jalen Tolbert at 3,800. Anything stand out to you as far as value plays?
Yeah, I've got my cheap wide receivers with upside list is Trey Tucker, who's probably going to get 3 targets, right? But can go for 100 yards and score on that. Roma Dunze, who looked pretty bad last week, but was also, came into the game questionable and looked really good in his first game. So Roma Dunze, might go a little overlooked now that people are down on the Bears offense. Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Naylor. Jalen Naylor's drawn a ton of praise from Kevin O'Connell for his development, for his role in this offense, for how great he's been so far. But his price has been bumped up off these 2 touchdowns with only 5 targets. So he's probably overpriced for what you're likely to get from him. And then 2 that are definitely, or maybe they're not definitely going to go overlooked, but Jordan Whittington is going to step into like that slot role for the Rams. And he was that dude in the preseason, and he's really capable of kind of getting open underneath and helping them move the change, which they're going to need. So he's a little more expensive than I would like, but all of these guys are, and I like him as a play. And then Devon Bailey, who I think a lot of people forgot about after week 1, he got, 8 targets, caught 8 passes for 39 yards. He actually averaged like 13.1 yards per catch in college. He's 6'4", right? Like he's a big bodied dude. He's not just going to work the short areas of the field, but I didn't punish myself by going back and watching that entire game from week 1, but so I don't know like what else happened on the other plays, but I did go back and watch all his catches, and he was 2 of them were schemed plays, like designed to go to them. Another 1 or 2, he was the first read, and like at least 3 of the other, like all but 1 of the other ones, he was the first like outlet read, right? Like look downfield, if it's covered, check down to Bailey. So he and Lil Jordan Humphrey kind of split the slot snaps in week 1. Bailey was out last week. Little Jordan Humphrey played like 51 snaps, something like that. Bailey's back this week. So I would expect him to actually, be the starter and spend plenty of time in the field. And at his price tag, 3,400, I think he's you can't run against Tampa. The Broncos can't run. So they're going to have to throw the ball here. And he might only see 4 or 5 targets, but also it wouldn't shock me to see another 7-8 target game from him.
Yeah, I mean, we're having to dig the bottom of the barrel. This one isn't quite at the bottom of the barrel. My guy, Matt, he's been pounding the drum for some Panthers takes. We, of course, are going to have the quarterback switch from Bryce Young to Andy Dalton. Any thoughts on that quarterback shift and what it might mean for the offense, maybe particularly Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, no, I might come around on it, right? Because I'm looking at these guys who are, it's like I said about the Cam Akers thing, right? Where it's like, okay, I can spend $1,300 more and get from Cam Akers up to Zach Charbonnet. Like I can spend, for some of these guys, right? Roma Dunze is still like a solid player. Jalen Naylor, 4,400. I can spend 500 more and get to Deontay Johnson. It feels so icky to click a Panthers player. It feels so icky to click a Panthers player at high ownership because people are like, oh, Deontay Johnson, even Adam Thielen's popping with a little bit of ownership expectations. And, it was a unique situation last year that Andy Dalton threw the ball 54 times, 58 times, whatever it was against Seattle. So, yeah, I mean, it's not like they want to come out here and play that type of game. But 30, 35 pass attempts from Dalton. And the thing is, Dalton, 3-time Pro Bowler, went to the playoffs 5 years in a row. Like his arm strength was never his exceptional attribute. And that's obviously declined over time. But he still knows how to run an NFL offense, knows how to read the defense, knows how to keep the offense on track. So I expect one of the things Belichick said this last week was with the parity in the NFL, it's often not the best team that wins. It's the team that plays best that day wins. And really no team in the NFL is as bad as the Panthers have looked, And so, or think about last year, heading into last year, everyone was like, oh, the Texans rebuild year, they're going to go 2-14 or 2-15, maybe 3-14. And then it's like, oh, CJ Stroud is that dude, and the rest of the team is way better than we thought because they're playing well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to give them a spark. I'm not picking the Raiders in my survivor pool this week, for example, even though I think they'll win. Like, I think it's riskier than it would have been before.
That's quite the brag that you're still alive in your survivor pool. Because
we have a couple OWS pools on Splash, and we've lost 77% and 69% of entrants so far. Goodness. So, but yeah, so I might come around on Deontay. Honestly, I just haven't been able to get there because then it's my contrarian nature, and I look at whatever his ownership prediction is, and I'm like, oh, come on, guys, Deontay Johnson. But now when I think about the price tag, it is like, maybe I'm just like being hard-headed about that one.
We are going to move on to tight ends here in a sec. Want to mention, as always, we got 2 premium shows for those of you who are YouTube members around here. I do DFS After Dark on Saturday nights. This week, my guest is Galen. He's the man behind the Solver, the sim tool over with the guys at ETR. So he's going to show us a lot of the bells and whistles for checking out the sims, kind of how to leverage that in a good way. One fun thing about it is you can hand build your lineups, a lineup you like, and then kind of test it against the field, see how it grades out over the course of a bunch of simulations. So super sharp dude behind the scenes, excited to talk to him. And then Sunday mornings, we have our cram. 10:30 a.m. We go over the overnight news, latest thoughts on each position. We do some ownership surveys with the chat. Which guys are you guys leaning to play? It's been very valuable to see where steam might be coming in these tournaments. And then we do some drafts, build some pick'ems as well. So you become a YouTube member, the hand builder tier there. So for $8, you get 2 premium shows a week, comes out to $1 a show. Good deal if I say so myself. And let's head over to tight end, JM, and see if we have any good deals here. The position obviously getting thinned out a little bit this week with injuries, with Kittle looking doubtful. I did just see Njoku is not going to play this week. What are you seeing at the tight end position?
Yeah, we always run through this quickly, but in terms of like tying into those game environments, McBride's a really great play this week. Laporta, most of the time he's probably not going to hit in this spot, but most people are going to be off him, right? So he's still plus EV this week, especially pulled into stacks around that game. I mentioned Goddard as a guy who's interesting. And then the other main guy, all the tight ends in that Cowboys and Ravens game are interesting. And then the main guy, like kind of outside of game environments who draws my attention is Brock Bowers. He's been so central to that offense. And I do think, you asked about Davante Adams earlier and I didn't get around to talking about him, but I do think that the Panthers keep this game more competitive. And if they keep this game competitive, like the Raiders want to win on the ground, the Raiders are currently, and this will even out over time because this is far to the extreme, but they're negative 0.6 EPA per run. So that means on average, they lose more than half a point on the scoreboard every time they run the football. Like that's how bad they are at running the football. They have 2 first downs all season running the football. Obviously a softer matchup than they've had, but they are like atrocious at running the ball. And I think that the Panthers will be able to be competitive in this game. So another 33 to 35, maybe even 38 pass attempts from Minshew could be in the mix, which means Bowers is going to be heavily involved again. Just such a talented dude to have, on your offense at this price tag. So I like Davante Adams as well. He kind of falls into that bucket of, if I'm paying 7,600, what are his chances of getting 35 to 40 points? But at tight end, it's a totally different discussion. Most of the guys who are cheaper are pretty thin options and might only get you 6 or 7 points. Whereas, you have to play a tight end, right? So if you're going to pay in this kind of 4.5 to 5.5K range, I think Bowers has the highest ceiling of the group and a really nice option. And one other guy I'll throw out there, Pat Freiermuth, what do we have? 43 pass attempts from Fields so far, but if he ends up throwing it 28 times in this one, Freiermuth has 4 targets, could easily see 6 or 7 targets if things work out in his favor. And that's kind of one of those guys that he's capable of putting up 18 points and nobody will be on him. So I think he's an interesting way to save salary.
Anything you're doing on the mega punt end, I'm talking the Johnny Muntz, the Greg Dulciches, the Eric Sober. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. The backup tight end on the Niners, Jordan Akins types, anything down there?
Yeah, Johnny Smith is down there too. I don't think so. I was down as low as 2.6K last night of who's down here, because it's tight end's pretty ugly. If you got to pay down, maybe pay down all the way. I might mix in some of those guys because of roster construction, but there's nobody who I'm oh, I like this guy. So yeah, you might dig down. There's no Mike Gesicki this week, right? You might dig down there. Johnny Smith, this looks good, right? 7 targets last week, but it's he played 32 snaps out of 77. The week before he played 20 out of 71. What I like about Jonnu is typically his usage is schemed usage close to the line of scrimmage, which really fits well with their quarterback situation. You might say, hey, let's get Jonnu some screen passes or some, he goes in jet motion and then they toss it to him, whatever it is. They kind of use him in the same way the Titans did, the same way the Patriots tried to, where it's mostly schemed stuff close to the line of scrimmage. So I could see him being part of the game plan is why I like him. The other guys, I don't see them being part of the game plan. It's more hey, they'll be on the field and maybe they score a touchdown or get a couple targets.
Yeah, and it's kind of playing that dance we were talking about with quarterback too, right? Where it's if no one separates at the position, you can live with low scores. I had a bagel, and I had my Daniel Dimes double stack last week. I did Neighbors, and I had Theo Johnson. Just do the cheap correlated tight end. I finished top 30 in multiple tournaments with that lineup with a 0 from Theo Johnson because no tight ends went nuts. McBride had a fine score, so you can kind of avoid getting buried in that way, but if a Trey McBride, a Bowers, or one of these guys goes for 30, then it's man, you are going to be in rough shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You guys know the drill. We are getting to the point where we build a lineup with some building blocks. Let's get ready. All right, another week with the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League. We got the payouts fixed this week. Our first 4-figure prize up top here. We got the 1K prize, and we filled already. This filled yesterday, 750 entries. It is a 3 max, which is increasing the fill rates. I'm also hearing this is the rumor on the street, Jam. So, some of these sites, communities have their rake-free contests, but the links to them are getting spread around the other Discord. So there's interlopers coming in, getting the link and then sharing it elsewhere. So you guys in the Deposit Kingdom, I will tag you on Tuesdays via the announcements when this contest posts. So make sure you guys get in there. Can't let the interlopers beat the Deposit Kingdom and the 1 week season crew to getting to this contest, but I will try to make it bigger again next week. JM, you maybe teased one portion of this earlier. I am flying in blind this week. What is the building block that's going to kick us off here?
Yeah. So before we give that, I was thinking, I talked to you before the show. I wanted to mention this. I was thinking coming off last week's show, we talk so much about players on this show because that's what people want. And most content sites talk so much about players. And one of the things that is so critical to remember is that picking players is probably never going to win you a tournament. It's like a very small percentage of weekends across multiple years where just picking players wins you tournaments. So I was thinking, the other day I was thinking over the last 2 years, I've had 8 or 9 different weekends where I had first or second place finishes in tournaments. And some of those, it was like one roster that finished first or second. Other weekends, it was like several rosters across several contests. And there's 0 of those weekends that I would credit to just like picking players. And probably half of those weekends have not even been about the players so much as just the theory behind how I was building the rosters. The other half obviously had like a huge component of that. So that would be my recommendation to any of you watching this is, yeah, we're listening for the players that we like and picking players, but like that's not going to win you a tournament. Pay attention to what we talk about with regards to like what we're doing with those players, how we're building with those players, how we're thinking about how we get to first place in a tournament, because most of our competition, shockingly, doesn't ever think about that. Most of our competition thinks about which players do I like, how do I fit them onto a roster under the salary cap, and the more we think about roster construction and first place finishes and how these rosters help us in that way, the more we'll benefit. So with that, let's start with what did I actually name this block? It's in the I think I named it Smash in the player grid. So first smash would be this Cardinals-Lions game. And the way I want to play this, and this isn't the core way I'm going to be playing this, but this is a very unique way to play this. Right? I'm going to have a lot of St. Brown. I'm going to have a lot of Jameson Williams. I'm going to have some Jahmyr Gibbs, but I want to go with a David Montgomery play.
Okay.
And the thought here is David Montgomery, again, he's, 17, I forget what it was, 17 touches in one game and 15 touches in the other, 18 touches in one game, 15 in the other. We know he's going to get the goal line work, right? And in this spot where we should actually expect the Lions, they threw the ball 55 times last week. We should expect them to lean more heavily on the run, which is their personality, which is how they want to win games. Last week they were playing Tampa, so a unique situation, and the Cardinals can be run on. So there's a chance that David Montgomery puts up a 25-plus point game here, and he's coming in at low ownership. And what's really great about this is leverage. So how do we win a tournament? Ideally, when we have a low-owned player, it's not just low-owned in isolation, but it's low-owned that also hurts other rosters. So maybe Montgomery's chances of hitting are a little bit lower than some other low-owned player that we like, but he's actually more valuable. He actually makes us more money over time, because if he's putting up 2 touchdowns, he's taking away points from a popular Jahmyr Gibbs, from a popular Amon-Ra St. Brown, from a less popular than he should be Jameson Williams. And so this ends up helping us kind of across the board in this spot. So David Montgomery being the play there, Trey McBride at tight end on this roster.
Yes.
Trey McBride, really good matchup against the Lions linebackers who shouldn't be able to cover him, and expect a high scoring game here and good opportunity for us to get kind of one of those 25 pointers that Pete alluded to, where it's like, okay, if one of these tight ends puts up a big score, you probably had to have it. So a really unique starting point here. And then we flip over to the other smash spot, being the Cowboys and Ravens game, and we throw in Dak and CeeDee Lamb. Nice. And we do it without a bring back. And so what's really interesting about the Ravens is Zay Flowers' price tag is $6,900 or $6,800 or whatever it is. He's never cracked 25 DraftKings points, and he's priced up here at 6,800, right? But also 6 of his last 9 games, including playoffs, he's gone for 20 plus DraftKings points. So he's like soaking up a lot of the points where he's not really justifying the price tag, but he's taking away points from other guys on that team. So there's a scenario where this game shoots out, Zay Flowers puts up 22 points, and like, that doesn't mean you want to play Zay Flowers, but it also means that nobody else on the Ravens is putting up enough points for you to want to play them, right? So this is kind of telling a story of that game playing out that way. Dak and CeeDee, again, they had games last year where they combined for 75 points, games at home, 75 plus points, 80 plus points. So we say, hey, maybe they put up 5x their combined salary. David Montgomery gets the touchdowns and pulls stuff away from everybody else. Dak and CeeDee without a bring back ends up being the ideal way to play it and not the way most people are playing it. And then obviously Trey McBride kind of fits into this. So just a really fun way to put this together where it's very different from the way the field is building. And yet it's like a very clear way for these games to play out. And Cowboys, that might be the most obvious way for the game to play out. And the other one, it's like maybe the second or third like likeliest way for the game to play out, but it's being underrated in terms of the way people are going to be building around that game. So I like this smash block as a way to get action in these top games, play pretty clear and obvious plays, but not something most people will be doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess we didn't, some like early ownership projection. It doesn't seem like people are going to get up to McBride. I wonder too, like same concept with Montgomery, like people feel burned by Laporta. I don't think he's going to catch much ownership at that price. And that may be another way too. Like if you didn't go the McBride angle, you play Laporta as a way of like, what if all the touchdowns go through here and I get the 25+ point score at the lowest scoring position?
100%. Yeah.
All right. Where do you want to go from here? We still got 5 spots. We definitely have spent some money here. We're going to get a little cheaper at defense, I assume, but what do we do here next?
Yeah, let's go ahead and throw in the Bears defense just to get us a cheap defense that we can get a better sense of what our salary looks like now. Several good defenses this week that are kind of underpriced. The Bears, the Bucks are two of the ones that really stand out to me. $3K for the Bucks, $2,600 for the Bears. So we'll go Bears here. And then we see that we're definitely going to have to save some salary, but I think next thing we do is decide what we're going to do at the running back position, right? We're different enough in the way that we're building that chalk is not an issue for us. And we could go Jordan Mason, we could go Charbonnet, we could even go both guys if we decide that we need that. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and pick which of these two guys we put in first?
Let's just do the cheapest of the two. I mean, it's only $200, but that might come in handy. Let's put in Charbs here. Yeah, at 6K, which leaves us about 4.5K for 2 wide receivers and a flex. So we're definitely going to need to get one of those probably sub 4K wide receivers you'd mentioned earlier. Maybe would you ever do Jameson Williams and Montgomery together? I'm trying to figure out.
I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that. I don't think that's the direction I'm going to go on this one. Yeah. What I'm looking at right now, because I want to still get action to the 49ers. I want to still get action on that Saints and Eagles game if I can. So my initial thoughts here go to Rashid Shaheed's 5,300 and Jawan Jennings. Let's check Jennings' price tag because I'm not high on Jennings,
4,100,
but it allows us to get exposure here. And this actually doesn't open up that much for us at that last spot. So what I would probably end up doing then is taking Jennings off, putting in Vele and seeing what that does for our salary. Because again, target expectations between the two are going to be pretty similar. Jawan Jennings, obviously a better shot at a touchdown. And then that's perfect. So I was actually thinking it'd be great to get Deontay Johnson on here after.
You came around quickly.
Crowd pleaser. And it's also one of these things where sometimes if I'm going to take this guy that I'm playing him less because I have high conviction on him and more because the field does. And I don't want to like fall behind in certain places. It's like, well, this is the type of roster to put him on because people aren't going to have Vele. People aren't going to have this Cowboys Cardinals pairing set up this way. And then, you get your Shaheed, you get your upside there, you get your Deontay Johnson. So don't dupe this roster. This is actually a pretty cool roster that I like. And again, we see like the salary squeeze on this week, but there are ways to work around it that might not kill us.
Can I get your quick thoughts or slightly expanded on Shaheed? You mentioned him last week. He was a smash, obviously got loose for another one. I get like a little queasy where I'm still looking at his target share. I'm like, is it the Olave game? Are we chasing a little bit? But clearly what he brings to this offense and what Clint Kubiak is doing, you feel like that's repeatable.
Yeah, I mean, never not play Shaheed. It's like, since like midway through, maybe all of last season. And last year we were getting him under 4K for a while. But I think I've had exposure to Shaheed every single week since the start of last season. But last year he wasn't the number 2 receiver. Now he is, right? 9 targets, but Derek Carr has only thrown the ball, 39 times, less than 39 times. He's part of this offense at this point. This year he is their number 2 guy. Last year he really wasn't. I did want to be able to touch on the Kubiak offense, but I'm not going to take the extra time for that. You can read my I really dove into it in my DFS interpretation this week. So if you're on OWS, if you're a subscriber, you can find that in the NFL Edge game breakdown for the breakdown for that game. But yeah, the offense is, they're not going to keep scoring at this rate, right? But they are going to have some more big games this year, and Shaheed's a big part of that. And as long as he's under 5,500, he's just like an auto play for me. I'm actually surprised that he's still at this lower price tag. So Shaheed has been, one of my more heavy exposure guys every time that he's hit, and that's going to continue to be the case.
I did just pull it up here so you guys can see what this looks like in the game interpretations here. I often show the scroll on here, but in the 1 week season edge, you can go to whatever game you want. There's an overview, most likely it's game flow, and then what Jam was mentioning, his interpretation here. So you can get Jam's thoughts, and this is all included in your 1 week season subscription, which
also,
you can
those game breakdowns are free. So if you even just have an OWS free account, you can read the whole everything but the DFS interpretations. You can read those, which is a great way to get a feel for all these games and matchups completely free. And you can actually also find the audio of it on the 1 week season podcast feed. So if you didn't know that, now you know.
There you go. Make sure you guys get signed up over there. Like I've mentioned, 20% off, promo code Pete if you want the keys to the castle and getting access to all of that stuff, including those premium podcast feeds. And I believe someone was on Twitter. Was it last week? They were asking about promo for the Bink machine. Is that now included, or how is that working, Jam? I forget what that was.
We have a promo for the Bink machine for Inner Circle members. It's in the Inner Circle podcast this week. But yeah, next week, week 4, we start discounting the price because we're getting deeper into the season. But we did an early discount for Inner Circle members. So
there you go.
Yeah, it's on the Winner Circle podcast from this last week.
Well, awesome. Appreciate you guys all hanging out with us live here, whether you are listening on playback or the audio when I put it on the In a Vacuum podcast feed. Always one of my favorite shows to do each week. Gets me in the right frame of mind for building lineups. We will have the Off and On the Clock Badge Bro party show here coming up at 2:30. Anything else, JM, before we head out?
Nothing else, man. I always say nothing else and then I say something, right? Nothing else, comma. Except think about upside this week, because there are, I think there's a lot that's just going to be kind of clumped up, and we'll probably see a lot of this throughout the season. And then a few spots or a few players that really separate. So the first place scores will still look like normal first place scores. You needed 220 this week, but then that 30th or that 70th percentile score might be 140, whereas in the past it might've been 170. Right. And so you want to be on that clump of guys who can still get you up to those high-end scores. And the more you think about that's going to be a big edge this season, given a lot of things we're seeing in the NFL.
The only other thing I forgot to mention as far as on my docket this weekend, I will have the video on the Deposit Kingdom YouTube channel. That is a separate YouTube channel where I do the pre-recorded videos. I got my 5 sleepers for underdog draft specifically. Do touch on the DraftKings plays there as well when it overlaps in a nice way, but those are looking for your gems. And then I hop in some drafts. You can keep an eye out on that video posting here. And if you did miss out on the DraftKings Deposit Kingdom League, we will have the underdog Deposit Kingdom Weekly League that'll populate on the site at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's going to go live while we're on Off and On the Clock at 3 p.m. So you can get in that if you want to do some drafts. All right. Have a great weekend. We'll see you guys around. For JM, I'm Pete. Until next time, this has been The Block Party.